I don't know what kind of political tricks it is they're trying to pull out there, but when it comes to science, it better be the damn truth. Let's first look at some planet temperatures. Temperatures of planets decrease following an inverse square curve, cooler the farther they are from the sun. The temperature of Venus is much, much hotter than this simple relationship, and Earth is a little warmer. The temperatures of Mercury, the Moon, and Mars fall exactly on this curve. There are a number of physical processes responsible for this departure from the normal line, the magnitudes of which are not being properly appreciated. Some planets have internal nuclear furnaces which are reasonably consistent over time, but the convective heat transfer outward from the core to the surface can vary over time. Planets with a molten core are characterized by having significant magnetic poles, seismic activity, and volcanism. In the absence of internal heating, the core will eventually freeze, the magnetic field degrades, and the solar wind then ablates away the atmosphere. Our moon is a stone-cold rock without internal heating. Let's look at Venus, which is over 400 degrees Kelvin hotter than its distance from the Sun would dictate. Its surface is hot enough to melt lead, and it's much hotter than the nearest planet to the Sun, Mercury. This radar image of the surface of Venus shows it is the most volcanically active planet in the solar system. Venus has a tremendous internal nuclear furnace. Venus has a lot of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere. To have the same number of molecules of CO2 in Earth's atmosphere as there are on Venus, we would have 32 million parts per million of CO2. To achieve this, we'd have to have a 100% pure CO2 atmosphere with a pressure 32 times that at the present. Perhaps Venus does have a measurable greenhouse effect from carbon dioxide, but it didn't suddenly start and run away with itself. It's always been that way. As a mind experiment, let's for a moment totally ignore Venus's massive internal nuclear furnace. Let's say Venus's elevated temperature is solely due to a greenhouse effect from carbon dioxide. Let's say also this greenhouse effect is linear, which gives us 14 1/1000ths of a degree temperature rise per 1,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Translating these results to Earth gives us 5/1000ths of 1 degree C temperature rise for the total CO2 greenhouse effect, and about 1/5 of that, or 1/1000ths of 1 degree C temperature rise for the human added CO2. If we also ignore Earth's internal nuclear furnace, giving all the 40 degrees C temperature rise to a greenhouse effect, we know that 37.5 degrees of that rise is due to water vapor in our atmosphere. Using the Beer-Lambert relationship, the human CO2 component then gives us 4/100ths of 1 degree temperature rise. We know the Earth is over 98% molten rock and iron. The core of our Earth is hotter than the surface of the sun. We know the solid surface of the Earth, the crust, is only about 30 miles thick. In a mine only 2 miles deep, it is almost too hot to work. The reason for this is that tremendous amounts of heat from inside the Earth is transmitted through the crust into our environment. In addition to ignoring our internal nuclear furnace, many environmental scientists totally ignore the warming effect of the thermal flywheel of the mass of our atmosphere. On the moon, for instance, if we had an atmosphere of nitrogen and oxygen, the weight of that atmosphere will keep the surface of the moon much cooler during the daytime, reducing radiative losses from the moon by about 2/3. That heat then is carried over to the nighttime temperatures, making the average temperature of the moon much warmer than it is without an atmosphere. If we had an atmosphere, the warming of Earth, the thing that makes our planet habitable, is then due to a nuclear furnace, a thermal flywheel, and lastly, some minuscule greenhouse effect, the human component of which is not distinguishable within natural temperature variations. Let's look at Mars with no significant elevation of temperature. It has no internal furnace, little mass of atmosphere, but a lot of CO2. Mars has the equivalent of 55,000 parts per million of CO2 on Earth and no apparent greenhouse warming. So we know at least 55,000 parts per million of CO2 has no effect. Let's forget the political tricks. Let's get back to real science. If we're going to control CO2 for some asinine reason, we need to do it on a country-by-country basis. The actual benefit of more CO2 is that crops are much more productive. With today's expanding global population, we need that extra crop growth. In the U.S., for instance, we are a net carbon dioxide absorber. We sink more CO2 here in the U.S. than we generate. So we're okay here. Other countries are not so fortunate. If we're going to control CO2, we need to do it on a nation-by-nation basis because we do not have and shall never have a global government. These images show only one of the many attempts, but every single one has been devastating to humanity. And no, computers will not make it possible. There have got to be some of you out there in internet land who have good ideas for making cheaper energy. Our civilization's entire progress has been based on energy costs of roughly $20 per barrel. That's our progress over the centuries for improved food, improved medical care, improved housing, improved transportation, and improved education. With our present energy costs about 4 times that amount, we're quickly moving backwards towards the Stone Age. Thank you in advance for your contribution to society.